There are moments in life where everything feels normal on the surface, but underneath, something feels off. You try to focus, but your mind drifts. You try to move forward, but you hesitate. You try to stay consistent, but something keeps interrupting you. And the strange part is, you can't always explain it. It's not big enough to panic you, not obvious enough to clearly identify, but it's there, a subtle resistance, a quiet delay, a feeling that something is slowing you down from within. I've seen this pattern before, not just from the outside, but from a place where patterns like this were understood very differently. Because when I was on the other side, we didn't always rely on big disruptions. We relied on small, repeated interruptions, just enough to break focus, just enough to create hesitation, just enough to slow someone down without them realizing it. And over time, those small interruptions became a pattern. Now, here's what most people don't understand: you don't always need something complex to break a pattern. Sometimes, all it takes is clarity and immediate response, not long explanations, not complicated steps, but something simple applied at the right moment. And that's what I'm going to show you today. 3 words, not repeated endlessly, not used randomly, but spoken with awareness. At the exact moment you feel that shift inside, because when used correctly, those 3 words interrupt the pattern instantly. They stop the hesitation. They reset your focus. They bring you back into control, but only if you understand when and how to use them. So don't listen to this casually, because if you've been feeling delayed, distracted, or internally slowed down, then what you're about to hear is something you can apply immediately and see the difference. Now, before you can use anything effectively, you have to recognize the exact moment it's needed, because these 3 words are not something you say randomly. They are used at a very specific point, the moment the pattern begins. When I was on the other side, this was the only moment that really mattered. Not when someone was already stuck, not when the delay had fully taken over, but right at the beginning, when it was still small, barely noticeable, because that's when it's easiest to interrupt. Now pay attention to this. The pattern never starts big. It starts subtly. A small hesitation, a random distracting thought, a sudden feeling of, I'll do it later. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but enough to shift your direction. And if you don't catch it there, it grows. That small hesitation becomes delay. That distraction becomes lost focus. That one pause becomes a pattern of stopping. Now, here's what most people do: they ignore that first moment. They think it's not a big deal. I'll fix it later. Let me just wait a little. And in doing that, they give the pattern time. And time is what allows it to build. Now understand this clearly. If you miss the first moment, you deal with a stronger version later. That's why awareness is everything. You don't wait until you're fully distracted. You don't wait until you've already delayed something important. You catch it immediately, right when it starts. Now, here's how you recognize it. You were about to do something, and suddenly you pause. You were focused, and your mind drifts for no reason. You knew what to do, but you start questioning it. That's the moment, not later, right there, because that's where your control still exists. Now, this is important. You don't analyze that moment. You don't try to understand why it happened. Because analysis takes time and time strengthens the pattern. Instead, you respond instantly because speed is what breaks it. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the three words themselves because once you know when to use them, you need to understand exactly how they work and why something so simple can interrupt something so persistent. Now, this is the part you've been waiting for. The three words, simple but precise, because when I was on the other side, we understood something clearly. It's not complexity that breaks patterns, it's clarity applied at the right moment. And these are the three words. Not this now, that's it. Short, direct, immediate. But here's what makes them powerful. It's not just the words, it's how and when you use them. You don't say them casually. You say them at the exact moment the pattern begins. That slight hesitation, that drifting thought, that urge to delay, right there, you respond. Not this now. Now understand what you're doing. You are not arguing with the thought. You are not trying to analyze it. You are not giving it space. You are cutting it off immediately. Because patterns grow when they are entertained, but they weaken when they are interrupted instantly. Now, here's why this works. Most people react passively. They notice the thought, they feel the hesitation, but they don't respond. And in that silence, the pattern continues. But when you respond immediately, you break that automatic flow. You take control back. Now, here's the key. You must say it with certainty, not softly, not with doubt, not as a suggestion, but as a decision. Not this now, no negotiation, no second guessing, because hesitation weakens the interruption, clarity strengthens it. Now, after you say it, you don't stay still, you move. Even in a small way, if you were about to act, you act. If you were about to focus, you return to it, because interruption without movement leaves space for the pattern to come back. Now, when you do this correctly, something changes quickly. You stop small delays before they grow. You reduce unnecessary hesitation. You stay focused longer without drifting. Not because the pattern disappears completely, but because it no longer has time to build. And that's the shift. You're no longer reacting after the fact. You're responding at the beginning. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what happens after this, because using the words once is powerful, but using them consistently is what breaks the pattern completely. Now, this is where everything either works or slowly fades, because using those three words once will help you in that moment, but using them consistently is what changes your pattern completely. When I was on the other side, this was the difference we watched for. Not whether someone could interrupt something one time, but whether they could do it again and again. Because patterns are not built in one moment, they are built through repetition. And the same is true for breaking them. Now, here's what happens when you first start. You catch a few moments, you interrupt a few thoughts, you stop a few delays, and you feel the difference. But then, you miss a moment, you forget once, you hesitate longer than you should, you allow the pattern to continue, just this time. And if you're not careful, that one moment becomes two, Two becomes a habit, and the old pattern starts rebuilding. Now understand this clearly. Consistency is more important than intensity. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to catch every single thought, but you need to catch most of them quickly. Because quick interruption weakens repetition. Now, here's the shift you need to make. You stop treating this like something you try occasionally, and you start treating it like your default response. Every time hesitation appears, not this now. Every time your focus drifts, not this now. Every time you feel delay starting, not this now. No delay in your response, no overthinking, just immediate correction. Now, this is important. You don't wait to feel strong. You don't wait to feel motivated. You act regardless of how you feel, because feelings change, but your response must stay consistent. Now, when you do this over time, something powerful happens. The pattern starts weakening. You hesitate less, you delay less, you stay focused longer. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because you've trained your response. Now, instead of reacting automatically, you respond intentionally. And that changes everything, because once your response changes consistently, your results follow naturally. Now, in the next chapter, I'm going to show you what can still go wrong, because even when you're consistent, there are small mistakes that can slow your progress again. And if you don't recognize them, you'll wonder why the pattern hasn't fully disappeared. Now, this is where many people get confused, because they use the words, they apply the method, they even see some progress at the beginning, but then suddenly it feels like it stops working, and they don't understand why. When I was on the other side, this was one of the most predictable phases, not because the method failed, but because small mistakes were introduced. Mistakes that seem minor, but completely change the result. Now, here's the first ones. They start saying the words without awareness. At the beginning, you say, "Not this now," with clarity. You mean it, you're focused, you're intentional. But over time, it becomes automatic in the wrong way. You say it casually, without attention, without real decision behind it. And when that happens, it loses its strength because it's no longer a response, it's just a phrase. Now, here's the second mistake. They delay their response, they feel hesitation, but instead of responding immediately, they wait. They think about it, they question it, they sit in it for a few seconds too long, and those few seconds are enough for the pattern to start building. Now, when they finally say the words, they're already responding late. And late interruption is always weaker. Now, the third mistake, they interrupt but don't move. They say, "Not this now," but then they stay still. They don't act. They don't return to focus. They don't continue what they were doing. And that creates a gap. And in that gap, the same pattern comes back, because interruption without movement is incomplete. Now, here's the truth. It's not enough to stop something. You have to replace it with action, with focus, with continuation. Now, here's the final mistake. They expect instant perfection. They think after using this, they should never hesitate again. They should never feel distracted again. And when it happens, they get frustrated. They think this isn't working, but that expectation breaks consistency. because now they stop applying it correctly. Now understand this clearly. This is not about eliminating every thought instantly. It's about reducing the pattern over time through consistent interruption. Now here's the correction. You stay aware. You respond immediately. You move right after. And you stay consistent without expecting perfection. Now, when you remove these mistakes, everything starts working again. You regain control quickly. You stay focused longer. You delay less and act more. And that's when the pattern begins to fade for real. Now, in the final chapter, I'm going to show you how to lock this in completely, because once you understand how to use this properly, you need to make it your natural response. And when that happens, you won't just interrupt the pattern, you'll outgrow it. Now, this is where everything becomes permanent, because up to this point, you've learned when the pattern starts, how to interrupt it, and what mistakes to avoid. But if this doesn't become your automatic response, you will always have to rely on effort, and effort fades. When I was on the other side, this was the final stage we paid attention to, not whether someone knew what to do, but whether they could do it without thinking. Because once a response becomes automatic, it doesn't require energy. It doesn't depend on mood. It just happens. Now understand this clearly. Your default response determines your daily experience. If your default is hesitation, you will always slow yourself down. If your default is distraction, you will always lose focus. But if your default becomes immediate interruption and movement, you stay in control. So how do you lock this in? Repetition with awareness. Every time the pattern appears, you respond the same way. Not this now. Immediately. No delay, no analysis, no hesitation. And then you move. Now here's the shift. At first, you will have to remind yourself. You will miss moments. You will catch yourself late sometimes. That's normal. But what matters is this: you correct quickly, because quick correction prevents the pattern from strengthening. Now, over time, something changes. You don't have to remind yourself anymore. You don't sit in hesitation the same way. You don't entertain distractions as long, because your mind has learned a new response. And that response becomes automatic. Now, here's what that looks like in real life. You feel hesitation, it's cut off instantly. You notice distraction, you return to focus immediately. You sense delay, you move without thinking twice. No internal debate, no back and forth, just response. Now, this is where control becomes natural, not forced, not difficult, but consistent. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean the pattern disappears completely overnight. But it does mean this: it never gets the chance to grow, because it stopped at the beginning, every time. Now, this is the final truth. You don't eliminate patterns by fighting them once. You eliminate them by never allowing them to continue. And once that becomes your habit, you don't just interrupt delay, distraction, or hesitation. You outgrow them, because they no longer match how you respond. And when your response changes permanently, your results follow the same way: steady, consistent, and fully under your control. Now, this is the final shift. And this is where everything changes at the deepest level. Because up to this point, you've been learning how to interrupt the pattern. You've been catching it, stopping it, replacing it, But now you move beyond interruption. You step into command. When I was on the other side, this was the difference we feared the most. Not when someone reacted, but when they no longer reacted at all. Because reacting means something else initiated the moment. But commanding means you decide what continues. Now understand this clearly. As long as you are reacting, you are one step behind. You're waiting for something to happen, then responding to it. But when you shift into command, you are one step ahead. You don't wait for hesitation to grow. You don't wait for distraction to pull you away. You are already in control of your focus. Now, here's what that looks like. Instead of constantly stopping thoughts, you begin to direct them. Instead of fighting delay, you move before delay even has a chance. Instead of reacting to distraction, you stay anchored in what you're doing because your focus is no longer unstable, it's directed. Now, this is important. The three words, not this now, help you break the pattern, but this final shift is what keeps it from coming back the same way. Because now you are not just interrupting, you are leading your own response. Now, here's the difference you will feel. Your mind becomes quieter, your decisions become faster, your actions become more direct, not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer giving space to what used to control you. Now, this is where most people never reach. They stay in a cycle of reacting and correcting, reacting and correcting. But you move beyond that. You stabilize. Now your focus holds longer. Your movement becomes consistent. Your direction stays clear. And that changes everything. Because once your mind is under your command, your results stop being random. They become predictable. Not overnight, but over time. Now let me say this clearly. This is not about controlling every thought. It's about controlling what you allow to continue. Because every thought doesn't matter, but what you entertain does. So you don't chase perfection. You maintain control. You stay aware. You respond instantly. You direct your focus intentionally. And once that becomes your default, you don't just stop patterns, you prevent them from forming the same way again. And that is the final shift from reacting to interrupting to commanding. And once you reach that point, you are no longer trying to stay in control, you are in control.